Hi, and the Gloomspite Gitz Battletome, as well as various other assorted things, came out last week. So I've been having a read through it over the last week, and I was actually quite excited for it. I was a little disappointed that Slanesh was not the next one. But that being said, I thought to myself, well, actually, if I get a Goblin army, then, well, I've got to paint my Stormcast first. But then what I'll have is a Death army, a Chaos army, an Order army, and a Destruction army. I will have the full house of Grand Allegiances. But I've always very much liked Goblins. I haven't always played them a lot in tournaments because Horde armies can be a bit messy. This doesn't have to be done as a Horde army, though, because you've got options in here. Not just options for being able to take squigs and Troggoth trolls, as you know, and you've got elite units in there. But you could actually, I mean, you could build an army just of Troggoths if you like. You could do it as spider goblins and or spider grots. Goblins, as well as night goblins, as you like. I mean, you know, you've got various battle line options here if the general is a certain thing, as, you know, you would expect. So you could absolutely do a Troggoth force, troll force. You could absolutely just do a pure spider, spider goblin force or a night goblin force or just goblin force. Or you could just do it entirely made out of squigs with a few goblins on top of them. But you could have just squig models if you wanted. So you've got, for example, the main battle line ones, shooters and stabbers, so they're just your basic night goblins with spears and or bows. And but for me, fanatics are really where it's at. Now, in terms of the lore, the Bad Moon is very much a part of it. In fact, there is like quite a lot of the Age of Sigmar armies, not by any means all, or even all of the newer ones, but by quite a few, are starting to get scenery pieces that just come included in your army. You don't pay points for them, they just do a thing. This one moves around. And it's, I have to say, with the rules of it, I think it's slightly ambiguous because what it's supposed to do, you're supposed to start it off in a corner of the battlefield. Now, just to go through what the effects of this are, it can have a negative effect on your opponent and a positive effect on you. Now, while it's in a corner, it doesn't do anything, but it has to start in a corner. So the very first turn, it's not actually going to do anything. But from the next turn, you get to move it. Now, what you do is you get a map indicating in the middle of the four quarters of the battlefield a crescent moon symbol, and then in the middle you've got another symbol there, and it's supposed to move from the corner to a moon, so in other words the middle of a quarter, in which case its effect, both positive and negative, takes effect for all units in that quarter of the battlefield. So lots of getting tape measures out for this. And then it moves from the moon to the centre of the battlefield, where it affects everything on the battlefield. So it'll be like, turn 1, it won't do anything. Turn 2, it will move to the centre of one of the quarters and affect everything in that quarter. So I suppose if there's a particular quarter of the battlefield where there's a large build-up of your opponent's forces and you want to head there too, maybe put it in that corner so that in turn 2 it'll start to have a negative effect on your opponent. So, and then when it's in the middle, it affects the entire battlefield. So turn 3 affecting the entire battlefield. From then on, it's supposed to move to another moon again. Now, what seems to be a little bit unclear from this, as far as I can tell, is that do you have to move it to the opposite side, or can you move it to a different moon and then therefore keep it in play all the time? Because as soon as you move it to a table edge, because if you were to move it just in a straight line, the implication in the lore is that it doesn't do that, because it talks about the Bad Moon suddenly shifting position, not carrying on its normal path. So that's an implication there, but I don't think it explicitly says it. But if you did, you'd go corner has no effect, turn 1. Turn 2, middle of a quarter. Turn 3, middle of the battlefield. Turn 4, middle of a quarter, but potentially now a quarter where there's nothing going on. It depends how it's all working out. Turn 5, to the battle edge, doesn't do anything again. Now, if you want it to have an effect in turn 5, of course, you can't just carry on a straight line. So I would take that to mean, as long as you move it from the centre to a moon in a quarter, then you're okay. The other thing is you don't necessarily just get to move it once either, because on a turn where you get to move it at all, you roll a d6. On a 1, it won't move at all. On a 2 to 5, it makes the one move that I've just described, but on a 6, it makes 2 moves. So if on turn 2 you roll your die and you get a 6, you could actually move it straight to the centre where it affects the entire battlefield. So what are the effects? So first of all, it says if your army is this, it says at the start of your hero phase, you can pick one enemy unit and roll a die. If the roll is equal to or less than the number of models in that unit affected by the light of the bad moon, so it's not going to have any effect in the first turn, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. So straight away you can pick on a unit and do D3 mortal wounds to it, as long as you roll the die. Obviously, if it's a large infantry unit, you're guaranteed to be able to roll, even if you rolled a 6, it would still be less, you would hope, than the number of models in that unit. The next one, it says, so it adds 1 to casting roll for wizards affected by the light of the bad moon if they're Gloomspite Gitz, in other words, from this Battletome. But you subtract 1 from casting rolls for wizards affected by the light of the bad moon that don't have that in their Battletome. So against another, as long as you're not playing a civil war, against another army where it is. So again, you might choose to keep it in an area where the opponent has wizards, because it'll be -1 to casting rolls then. And then the other one, if your general with the Gloomspite Gitz keyword is affected by the light of the bad moon at the start of your hero phase, you get an extra command point. There are various ways to get extra command points in this army as well. It's quite spectacular. For example, there is a command trait, 1 low cunning. At the start of the first battle round, you receive 1 additional command point. So there's ways to get additional command points. Now, this is of no use whatsoever, of course, unless you can get yourself plenty of use out of command points. Would you ever want to use several command points? When we look to some of the actual heroes, and particularly for squigs, it has to be said, there's a number of goblin heroes that do get command abilities that can buff your squigs, and I love squigs. I'm a couple of months probably from deciding on what list I would want, because, you know, I like to sort of start off with something and refine it. But I like squigs. I'd be very sorry if at the end of all this process I decide that squigs aren't actually worth it. So, for example, the big boss, you know, the loon boss on Mangler squigs. This is your big 300-point behemoth here. But it gets a command ability. You can use this command ability at the start of a combat phase. If you do so, pick 1 friendly model with this command ability. In that combat phase, you can add 1 to wound rolls for friendly squig units while they're wholly within 18 inches of that model. So that's a really good use of a command ability there. There's another one where, you know, you can say for this command ability for a different one. This is Loon Boss with Giant Cave Squig. If you do so, pick 1 friendly Moonclan Grot unit wholly within 12 inches of model with this command ability, or wholly within 24 inches if it's the general. If the unmodified wound roll for an attack made by that unit in that phase is 6, that attack inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target in addition to any normal damage. So a Grot unit is going to be quite large. You might get a lot of attacks in there. Decent chance of an unmodified wound of 6, and you can be doing extra mortal wounds as a result of that as well. You know, there's quite a lot of command abilities. You know, there are quite a lot of command abilities here. And it does work very well. And this is always great for looking for examples of synergy. Although when you look through here, you don't have really passive abilities like Nighthawk get a lot of these, but these not so much. Passive abilities that just straight up buff friendly units. But you do get command abilities that have very powerful effects for buffing, you know, increasing the destructive power of friendly units. Sometimes particular friendly units, sometimes it's a little bit less specific there. So, you know, there's definitely scope here, and it has a huge range, an absolutely massive range of units available to you. Not only do you have a wide range of different units in terms of, you know, you've got your night goblins, your forest goblins, your spider riders, you've got your trolls, troggoths, and you've got your squigs. You've got all of that, and you can specialize around one of them if you want, or get them all in there. But you've also got a very large range of leaders as well. 2 of which are behemoths as well. Of course, you've got your Loon Boss and Mangler Squigs that I've already talked about, as well as the Web Spinner Shaman on Arachnid Spider. you know. So if you want to do a Spider Rider based army, then you can absolutely go for that as well. You've got, but you've got quite a few different ones, and a couple of interesting things as well. So one I noticed with the Beasts of Chaos book last time round. Before that came around, you know, there's a lot of units where it doesn't really, you know, when you can probably have quite a lot of, for example, standard bearers and musicians. The units that have standard bearer and musician options, usually it doesn't restrict you. So you could have basically in a unit, in a typical infantry unit, a champion. You can always only have one champion. But then you could just make up the rest of it of standard bearers and musicians. Now, you could argue, well, what's the benefit? You're not really getting any extra use out of it. Well, you sort of can in a little bit, because sometimes you're forced in a situation when you're removing models from the unit to actually remove your standard bearer or musician when you've got normal guys left, just either for the sake of coherency or just for tactical reasons. Whereas if they're all either a standard bearer or a musician, then you're always going to keep it until you're down to your last three. Which is a bit annoying for people who are thinking, right, to min-max this, what you've got to do is buy loads of boxes just to make one unit. No, thanks. But in Beasts of Chaos, it starts to reduce it. So if an infantry unit had a minimum size of 10, for example, if you bought it in multiples of 10, then it would allow you one standard bearer and one musician. If it was 20, one standard bearer and one musician per 20. It's carrying that on in here. So for the infantry units that have command units, you know, with Grots, it tends to be 20. You go in blocks of 20, and it'll say one standard bearer and one musician per 20. So that's very much carrying that on. So it wouldn't surprise me, it really wouldn't surprise me now to see in the General's Handbook 2019 that becomes just a straightforward rule. So we can see here, Gong Basher for shooters, 1 in every 20 models in this unit can be a Gong Basher. Add 2 to run rolls for a unit that includes any Gong Bashers. And then the same sort of thing for standard bearer, you can have 1 in every 20. So again, it's saying you can have more than 1 in the unit, but you're only having 1 per block, which means you don't have to have people going out buying multiple boxes of units to min-max it, which means the vast majority wouldn't do that at all, of course. In terms of the lore, you know, the Bad Moon, of course, is a central part of the overall thing. I mean, I will just say, just in terms of the playing the game, technical side of it, what worries me is that it's quite a large scenery piece. It's certainly expensive. And in terms of, not points, it couldn't cost any points, but in terms of what it's going to cost you in terms of the real money. The thing that concerns me is what if you're, it has no answer for this. So let's say you start it in a particular corner of the battlefield. And then let's say your opponent, knowing how it works, moves a unit to the centre of that quarter. I haven't seen, I could have missed it, I could admit, but I haven't seen any rule that says what you do in that situation. Because if you need to now move it to that quarter, then you get no choice in that. If it's got to move, it's got to move. What do? Do you just move it as close to that quarter as you reasonably can? Because at the end of the day, it's not a range thing anyway. It's just going to apply its effect to that quarter of the battlefield. So is that what you do? It doesn't really make it clear. I mean, that's what I think I would do as a sensible little way to get around it. But yeah, I mean, your opponent could in theory just go, right, I don't want it there, and put a load of stuff in there. But there's nothing there that says it stops it moving either. So it's a little bit, I just wish you'd have done that. I mean, common sense will prevail there. But in terms of the lore, it's quite funny. All the different factions of goblins all disagree on what it is. The Spider Riders, of course, think it's an egg lain by a great spider. You know, you've got other ones who think that Gorka Morka tried to take a bite out of it, but it was too hard for him, and now it's got a bit of him embedded in it. You know, lots of different ideas about it from the various goblin factions, but it is a key part of their overall mythology now, from all of them. You know, whether it's the Troggoths or whether it's the Night Goblins and Moon Clan Grots, shall I use their modern name, and the Spider Riders, all believe things like that. And you've got, I like the Ages of Lunacy as well, for when it's sort of describing the history of these from the Age of Myth. As it's described, they're described as being undefeated. You know, Sigmar kept trying to bash them down, but they kept coming in ever increasing numbers. That's a big feature of them, as you might expect. I mean, that's your typical horde idea there. Skragrot the Loon King being the main special character, and there's a few named characters that you've got the option of taking here, including, again, for the first time that I've seen in a Battletome, you've got, obviously with the Warhammer Underworlds, they come with these little bands, war bands, which also get Age of Sigmar rules. You've got some for well, various different ones. But for the first Battletome that I have seen, the rules for them are actually in here. So they're with the points costers and everything. And that's a new one coming out as well. So I don't think, if it's out, it's only just out. I'm not sure it's actually out yet. Which is Zarbag and Zarbag's Gitz. You know, it's actually included in this. It's got the full range of options in here. There have been a couple of people I've noticed who've noted a couple of discrepancies between the stats in here and the stats on the War Scroll still, if you use the Age of Sigmar app. What I would suggest there is that it's very difficult because Warhammer always say use the latest versions of rules. But in that particular case, I would strongly suspect that the app hasn't been updated yet. But I don't know how easy it is to tell from the app what, because it doesn't have a date on it. These at least have dates. But obviously, as it's brand new, I think you take the stuff from these as well. Now, in terms of other things that come with it, I mean, this is the limited edition book. You can just get the normal book, of course. But one thing that really annoys me with Games Workshop is there are very useful things they bring out, such as the dice. The problem with the dice, however, is, well, there's twofold. And then also you get War Scroll cards with them as well, which the War Scroll cards are always phenomenally useful, especially as they also include some cards for things like command points and other little effects that are attached to spells. But one thing that desperately annoys me is that they're always sort of basically limited edition. They don't just really describe them as limited edition as such, but they are. They do limited runs. The Beasts of Chaos, for example, I didn't get them, didn't get anything, because they sold out on the same day that they brought out the pre-order. I woke up late, I always do on a weekend. Too late, can't get them. These ones lasted 2 or 3 days before they sold out, but I also got up early to make sure this time. So you got these little, and the 6 has got like your sort of squig teeth on it. And but it's also got these awkward ones, awkward things around the sides as well to indicate the other numbers, which reminds me a little bit. It's a less annoying, I think, but still an annoying thing along the idea of the Idoneth Deepkin dice, where it's just got markers on it. You've got to count them up. It's worse on the Idoneth ones because they're sort of, the dice are largely transparent, or at very least translucent. But the transparent, I think, is, it's a clear resin or plastic that they're made of. But you still got to count things. I haven't got time to count. Okay, it's not that bad really when you look at it. It's not dissimilar to dice in terms of the way it's arranged, but it is not the same either. But the biggest problem with these is they're made of rubber. And, when I was sort of trying these out in the old, in the dice tray, a couple of them still bounced out. They do bounce. So you can imagine someone, and it's goblins, at the end of the day, you're going to be rolling a meaty amount of them. And obviously you get 20 here. It's not going to be uncommon to need to do, and you might have many more. You may need to do it in batches, but still you might want to do 20 at a time. They're going to go all over the place. They're going to be like squigs. And although you might think, all part of the character, stuff like that, it's going to cause chaos in games with these bloody things bouncing everywhere. Bouncy, bouncy. It's absolute madness. I think it's just going to be a toy, this one. I don't think I would seriously ever want to use them. So that's a second disappointing part of that. One is, you can argue to yourself, well, why aren't you moaning about limited edition, but you never use them anyway? But some of the dice are actually quite good. And it's nice to have characterful dice when you're using these things. Like the Stormcast and Nighthawk ones are really good, for example. They're really nice. And so, yeah, it is annoying that, but in terms of what it is, that's decent enough. Now, if we have a look at the endless spells, because endless spells, there's 4 of these. You usually get 3, but there's 4 for these ones. And you've got a predatory one. I don't really like. So far, I haven't. I have to say, seen an endless spell that some of them look good, and I think, oh yeah, I'd quite like to get it in there. But when I always look at it, I always sort of decide that I'm probably better off with you know, it's the same points worth of troops. I've never really seen an ender spell that I think, yeah, I'm really, you know, because you design it around a strategy. I never really think of a strategy where I'd like to use it because they all seem a bit RNG based. But there are a few nice ones in here. So, for example, the Scrap Scuttle's Arachnid Cauldron. So, casting value of 5. Only Gloomspite Gitz wizards can attempt to cast a spell, of course. And when they do, you place it within 1 inch of the caster. As long as this is not dispelled, the caster and the Arachnid Cauldron are treated as being a single model. So it's a bit like the Vortex thing. And it must remain within 1 inch of the caster. Except you don't put the model on top of it, I guess, is the difference there. If the caster is slain, then it is immediately dispelled, blah, blah, blah. So what does it do? As long as the Arachnid Cauldron is not dispelled, add 1 to casting and unbinding rolls for the caster. And the caster knows all the spells from the Law of the Moon clans. And when it's set up at the start of each of the caster's hero phases after it's set up, you must pick 1 unit within 3 inches of the caster. That unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. Note that this means that if there are no other units within 3 inches, the caster will suffer them. So you need to keep it by a large unit of grots. Obviously, you know, it doesn't say a friendly unit. If you're near an enemy unit, then you can attach it to those, in which case it becomes quite good. But, you know, you don't always want to put a goblin wizard right next to a load of enemy anyway. So really, large unit of grots nearby to absorb those. And it's only D3 mortal wounds. That shouldn't be too bad at all. And when you sort of look it up as well, the Arachnid Cauldron costing 50 points. I don't think that's too bad. You know, basically for +1 casting and unbinding, and it's all right. It's going to cost you a few grots as well. An average of 2 a turn, you would argue. There in each of your hero phases, that is. So, but you know, things like that, you think to yourself, actually, yeah, I could go with that. Especially when you look at something like, you know, there are some decent wizard characters in here. You can absolutely make them. I'm looking at this and thinking, yeah, magic heavy. Because Scragrot the Loon King is pretty decent. It's 220 points, I think it is. I'm just going to double check on that. That seems to be right to me. Yeah, 220 points. That's the main named character. Double wizard, so he can get to cast 2 spells, as well as unbind as well. You know, he gets a decent spell of his own there, decent command ability. And, you know, he already gets +1 to casting and unbinding rolls for him. Also, you know, he gets decent defense against mortal wounds. So it's one of those, each time a wound or mortal wound is allocated to the model, on a 4+, it's negated. So, you know, that's really good. That's pretty good indeed with 6 wounds. So I would absolutely, I think I'd almost always put him in pretty much any size Gloomspite Gitz army. 220 points for something that's pretty well defended. Powerful wizard as well. And also, if this model is your general, I'm always a bit wary of making a named character a general, because then you're missing out on a command trait. But if you did, at the start of your hero phase, roll dice. On a 4+, you receive D3 extra command points. Yet another. I mean, this would be one of those cases where I suppose if you wanted to go back to that command trait I talked about earlier on, where it gives you an extra like command point at the start of the first battle round. Well, this one's giving you D3 everyone. So, you know, you would certainly make him the general in that particular case. But yeah, I mean, it's got some very, very interesting abilities in here. And as I say, I've been reading it for a week and I'm starting to see all sorts of ideas, but I'm seeing several different armies to use as starting points. I mean, this is going to be quite tricky because there's so many different possibilities. And I always like when I sort of design the army to make sure that it works well together, it coordinates well, because I have a strategy in mind, and then I design the army around that strategy. Or sometimes as it emerges, if I see potential in an army to be really good at a different strategy, then you can sort of change that as well. But I want, at the end of it, when I've decided on how I'm going to form that army, I want it all to work well together to a common strategy. And it works really well. I mean, there's one unit I really like here. I like the model as well, but Scaremonger. It says in the first battle round, add 2 to save rolls for attacks that target this model. In the second battle round, add 1 to save rolls, blah, blah, blah. But in your hero phase, you can make a Gobberpalooza no-what's for this roll for this model. If you do so, roll a die on a 3+, pick 1 friendly grot unit within 18 inches of this model that is visible to them. You can re-roll charge rolls and run rolls for that unit until your next hero phase. And also subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made with it that target this model while it's within 3 inches of a friendly Moon Clan unit with 3 or more models, as opposed to the 5 or more that's usually needed. The Brew Git I really like as well. So what you can do with this one is the same sort of thing. You roll a d6, you roll a 3+. It's sort of like a priest type character, isn't it? Except it's not got priest in the keyword. And you can pick a friendly Moon Clan Grot hero within 18 inches and re-roll hit rolls for that hero. So, you know, I'd quite like to have him buffing basically the Mangler Squigs, because, you know, I'd really like those in the 300 points. It's sometimes difficult to say, is anything worth 300 points in a Goblin army? But the Loon Boss on Mangler Squigs, I haven't worked it out yet. I haven't done a load of maths on it yet. But I'm looking at that and thinking, yeah, that absolutely could be the way to go with it. So, you know, I think it's quite decent. I would say battalions, however, looking through some of the battalions at the moment, I'm not really seeing any as being really worth the points, but I haven't completely ruled them out yet. But again, just like Endless Spells, battalions is one of those where, you know, I usually start off by going, oh yeah, that's quite a nice ability. But then either deciding that the units you need to put in that battalion don't really work as effectively in the overall army as some others combinations would, or that the points for the battalion can be a bit steep. And, you know, the points for these ones can be as well. I mean, you've got the cheapest battalion option is 90 points, and it goes right up to 180. That's for the Trog Herd. If we just have a quick look at the Trog Herd, I'll give you a clue what it is. You've got to include, I mean, this is going to be very much a Troggoth-based army. A Dankhold Trog Boss, which is your hero character there. 3 to 9 units of Dankhold Troggoths, Fellwater Troggoths, or Rockgut Troggoths in any combination. And up to 2. You can have 0, but up to 2 Aelguzar Gargants, the giants basically. And the bonus for that is if the unmodified wound roll for an attack made with a melee weapon used by this is 6, add 1 to the damage characteristic, which sort of sounds nice, but, you know, with something like this, you're not going to get as many hits in as you would with, you know, a load of goblins or something like that. So when you need, and it's not 6s to hit, this is 6s to wound. So you've got to have hit and you've got to have wound, and you don't get absolutely loads and loads of attacks. I mean, you get a fair few for the number of them, but compared to, you know, it would be a much more useful one for goblins, but then you'd argue it'd be too powerful. And that's 180 points, and what do you get for it? You just get on an unmodified 6, you're basically going to cause an extra damage if it's not saved, because it could be saved, but if it's not saved, an extra damage. And you get an extra artifact of power out of it as well. 180 points sounds a bit steep, but it doesn't mean to say I wouldn't explore the idea of it. Okay, so, you know, looking at it, I would say I'm actually quite excited to be designing this. If I reckon, based on how long it's taken me to come up with armies for the other ones, it'll take me about 2 months, and the range in here is huge, and there's lots of different ways to do it, so it could easily take me 2 months. I suppose that really means I've got 2 months to paint my Stormcast, so I'd better get on with it. But yeah, I'm quite pleased with the actual rules. I'm quite pleased with the Battletome. Not so much with the dice, because, you know, being rubber, that's really awkward. Again, I know, yeah, like squigs, fun, but not practical. I like practical and fun, please. In fact, annoying. Worse than not practical, annoying. I'm not even going to dare to try and take those and use them. But the endless spells, as I say, out of the endless spells I've seen in Battletome so far, these ones actually look like, yeah, actually, I'm seriously going to consider these. Some of the other ones I've sort of tried and put them in, and then... But these ones I'm thinking, I've got a bit more hope for them, shall we say. I don't know whether I would or not, but I do have a bit more hope for them as well. So anyway, that's my sort of review of the Gloomspite Gitz. It'll be a couple of months before you see me playing with them. But let me know what you think anyway in the comments below, especially if you've read it through. What are your sort of thoughts on it? And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe for further content, and share with other people who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.